So 2016 was a big year. We had some notable celebrity deaths in the way of Prince and David Bowie and Carrie Fisher. We had an election, so we went from having a black president to an orange one. And then it was a pivotal year for me because I spent most of the year on the verge of a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual collapse. So there were three things that happened. I had a baby. My first son, Axel, was 2 months old at the beginning of the year. I had him in November of 2015. I bought a house and I changed jobs. So if you look at any of those psychological rankings of stress, those all rank in the top 5, and I did them within the first 3 months of 2016 because I'm an overachiever. So I'll start with the birth of my son. Shortly after having him, I noticed that something was wrong, something was off. I definitely was experiencing postpartum depression or anxiety or both, because that's a thing, you can experience both. I won't know for sure because when I went to my postpartum visit and had the screening, I fudged the answers a little bit because I don't like to fail. I wanted to pass that screening, and so I fudged the answers a little bit. It was fine. It was not fine. And I had this inner voice that was like, and my husband was there as well, and he's looking, I could feel him looking over my shoulder, and he knew something was wrong, but I think he didn't want to say, he didn't want to come across as making me feel like I was crazy, and so he didn't say anything, and so I went on with my little lie and just marched forward. And the way that my anxiety or depression manifested itself was when Travis would leave for work or to go to the gym, which was across the street from our house, I would be filled with this panic that he wasn't going to return, that something was going to happen, that he was going to leave us, and it was with everybody. So my mom would come, and I would just get so anxious when she would leave me after she brought me a meal or something like that. And I kept that inside. I didn't want anything to be wrong. I didn't want to be a burden on anybody. So I kept going. So I kind of equate this to when you're driving in the car and you hear a squeak or a rattle and you just turn the music up. And so that's what I did. I just turned the music up, and I like trap music, so the bass was really hard, so I didn't have to hear that squeak. So the next thing that I did was I bought a house. So on this maternity leave, I felt like my sweet infant couldn't possibly reside in a rented condo. He needed a space to run around, a backyard. He was 2 months old, so I'm aware that this sounds crazy. So I pretty much made the unilateral decision to get in touch with a realtor. My husband is very laid back until he's not, and he was pretty laid back about this whole thing, like, okay, sure, whatever you want, it's gonna make you happy. So we got this house in Seminole Heights. I really wanted to live there. I felt like God was really listening to my prayers with this house. I bought it before it went on the market. You know, everything was fine. And then we moved in. And the hot water heater kept tripping the circuit breaker. This never came up in the inspection because we didn't have appliances at the time. And so by the end of 2016, I'd say probably by the 8th month of 2016, we had touched every major system in the house. So, pile that on to the postpartum depression and anxiety. And so the next thing that I did was on my maternity leave, or before my maternity leave, I thought to myself, if I'm gonna be a working mom, I'm gonna be the best working mom there is. I'm gonna have an amazing career that I'm gonna crush it in. It's gonna be awesome. And so I need to make more money. But at the heart of it was, if I'm gonna be away from my son for 8 hours a day, then it's gotta be something that makes it worth my while, which isn't really possible. It's an impossible ask. It's not a fair ask to ask of a job or of myself. So I started interviewing for this job. It was my dream job. It was a campus recruiting job. And everything was fine. Like, the interviews were great. I just knew I had it, and I did. I got it. And then that's when things started to go sideways. So I get this job, and they're like, okay, we want you to start. We want you to give less than 2 weeks notice. And at that time, my job that I had before was pretty good. They were good to me. They were cool. And I didn't feel good about giving less than 2 weeks notice, but I had to do what I had to do. So I did. And then it got really weird when I told them that I would need a place to pump, and they were like, oh, okay. And they were very put off by the fact that I did not tell them that I had an infant, which I was not legally required to disclose. And so the third thing that made me go, oh, sugar, is that I start this job, and I'm so excited to be learning from somebody who like has glowing reviews. I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to learn from this person. I'm going to kill it. It's going to be awesome. So I go to Fort Lauderdale for this training, or for this first day. And the person, so we go to lunch with the whole HR team, because recruiting is in HR. And she says that she spent the entire lunch talking and gossiping about people that currently worked at the company and those that had left. And that's when that voice inside was like, oh man, you are in it now, girl. And so I was like, okay, I can't hear you, la 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 la, turning up the music, rolling down the windows, speeding down. And so I'm speeding through depression and anxiety and house problems, and you name it. And so my anxiety was so bad that I was sleeping about 4 hours a night. My newborn was actually a pretty good sleeper, but my anxiety kept me up at night. And then also I didn't want to have gut pyrotechnics all the time because I was so unsettled and my stomach was in knots. So I just stopped eating as much. I ate enough to survive. And so when people would compliment me on my lost baby weight, I wanted to be like, thanks, I'm really anxious. That's why I'm so skinny. It's not, I haven't found any secret. And so I'm speeding through until it's just starting to become unsustainable. I'm starting to have thoughts like, well, maybe I'll just have a mental health break and I can just hang out in 8 Central of St. Joe's, which is the psych ward, and get my shit together while all of this is going on. And then that way I won't have to fail. That's when I knew that there was a serious problem. So I reached out to a therapist. And I spent the first 2 sessions kind of charming her, letting her know that I was there for a check-in, that everything's fine, it's going well. And by the 3rd session, I was just so unable to continue that she said to me, she goes, do you even like your job? And it just like hit me like a throat punch. And I said, Jen, I really don't have time to answer that question right now, and quite frankly, I'm afraid of the answer, so can we not? So then at that point, I started to pray for, when things are really bad, that's when you start to pray. You start to pray like, Lord, please let me succeed, let me step on my enemies, and blah, 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 blah. Like all of these fanciful prayers are coming up to the surface, but they were all rooted in not wanting to fail. And so things got worse, and it all came to a head. I was leading this event that I'd been working towards all summer long. And I'm leading this event, and 2 of my colleagues had come into town to watch me do the event, and I'm presenting to all of these bright-eyed college students who are trying to get an internship. And as I'm presenting, I see the 2 of them slide notes back and forth and kind of laugh and smirk. And I thought to myself, like, I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, and now these people are passing notes. Like, I knew it was a toxic situation, but that moment really crystallized for me how bad it was. And I had to hold in a laugh. I really, really wanted to cry at first, but after that, I just wanted to laugh at how bad it was. So then my prayer became to, God, help me get out of this, but also help me have a soft landing. And so as I've been praying this, that event happened on a Friday, and I was really feeling like I can't do this anymore. I can't keep up this pace. I'm just unhappy. I'm not well, I'm not well. And I ran into Psalm 69, and it says, save me, O God, for the floodwaters are up to my neck. Deeper and deeper I sink into the mire. I can't find a foothold. I am in deep water, and the floods overwhelm me. I am exhausted from crying for help. My throat is parched. My eyes are swollen with weeping, waiting for my God to help me. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. So it goes on to say, rescue me from the mud. Don't let me sink any deeper. Save me from those who hate me and pull me from these deep waters. Don't let the floods overwhelm me or the deep waters swallow me or the pit of death devour me. So at this time, I'm working like 60, 70-hour work weeks. I have a newborn, and I go into the office on a Sunday to prepare for this next week that I have to finish this event in Orlando. And after reading that, I knew that at the very least, I had to have some conversations with HR to say, this is not working. And so I get to work that day. I drive the 2.5 hours to Orlando, and I get there and I ping my HR person. I say, you know, we've been reading this book called Crucial Conversations, and it's all about having hard conversations. So I reach out to her and I say, I need to have a crucial conversation. And she's like, okay, what's going on? And I'm like, you know, I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, I work with toxic people. What do you suggest that I do? And she goes, well, there have been some concerns about your performance. And I say, oh, that's interesting. That's the first I'm hearing of this. And her eyes got really wide. And in HR, in these situations, you can't admit guilt because you open yourself up to legal risk. And so I went on to explain what was happening with the note passing and this and that and the third. And she says, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, Sherry, what are my options at this point? And she said, well, we could do a mutual separation and you get a severance and you can leave. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's not a negative. It's kind of a neutral. And I'm like, oh, it's like conscious uncoupling. And so I was like, I will take that option. So 30 minutes later, I had turned in my notice and I left and I felt so free. And at that point, I was able to tune into the frequency of God's voice instead of drowning it out. And I spent the next 4 years of my life doing the hard work of rebuilding my marriage and my mental health and connecting with my kids and restarting my career. And it has been messy, and I have felt like the butterfly that is devolved into soup. But it has truly been a beautiful, messy, wonderful transition. Thank you so much.